On the outskirts of a small, forgotten town, there was an old, decrepit house that had been abandoned for decades. Locals spoke of the place in hushed tones, saying that the house was cursed. The legend had it that anyone who dared to spend a night there would face an unspeakable horror. One evening, a young woman named Emily, skeptical of such tales, decided to spend the night in the house. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sense of bravado, she stepped over the threshold, determined to prove the rumors false. The house creaked and groaned as if protesting her presence. Dust danced in the beams of her flashlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emily explored room after room, finding only layers of dust and decay. Just as she was about to settle into the master bedroom, she noticed something odd. An old, ornate mirror standing against the wall, covered with a filthy sheet. Curiosity getting the better of her, Emily pulled back the sheet. The mirror was grand and antique, with intricate carvings framing its surface. But something was strange. The reflection didn't quite match reality. It was as if the room in the mirror was slightly different, darker, more distorted. The floor seemed to ripple like water. Emily shrugged it off as a trick of the light and decided to get some rest. But sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt an increasing sense of unease, as if being watched. After hours of restless tossing, she finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Suddenly, she was jolted awake by a cold, clammy sensation gripping her arm. Panicked, she turned on her flashlight and scanned the room. The beam landed on the mirror. To her horror, the reflection in the mirror had changed. It showed the room as it was, but with a dark figure standing right behind her. Emily whirled around, but the room was empty. The figure in the mirror, however, was getting closer, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Breathing heavily, she grabbed her phone to call for help, but it was dead. She looked back at the mirror. The figure was now just inches away from her reflection. Trembling, she tried to back away, but her feet felt glued to the floor. The figure's hand reached out and touched the surface of the mirror. Emily's heart raced as she saw the mirror's surface ripple like water. The figure's hand began to come through the glass, pushing aside the boundary between the worlds. Emily screamed and stumbled back, her mind racing with terror. She reached for the door, but the air seemed to solidify around her, making movement almost impossible. The figure's head emerged from the mirror, followed by the rest of its shadowy form. It was an amalgamation of shadows and malice, its eyes fixated on her with an insatiable hunger. Emily tried to flee, but the house seemed to twist and elongate, warping her escape routes. Desperate, she grabbed a lamp and swung it at the mirror, shattering it into countless pieces. The moment the mirror broke, the figure let out a deafening scream, its form dissipating into the shards. The room grew eerily silent, and Emily, still shaking, took a deep breath, convinced she had escaped. But as she turned to leave, she saw something in the fragments of the broken mirror, a reflection of her own terrified face, except it was grinning back at her with an expression of pure, unholy glee. Emily ran out of the house, never looking back. The next morning, the house was found as it had always been, silent and abandoned. But the townsfolk noticed one strange thing. The mirror, though shattered, seemed to have been painstakingly repaired overnight, and the reflection within it was waiting, forever locked in a sinister grin. Emily never spoke of the incident to anyone, but the terror of that night lingered. She moved to a different town, trying to leave the memories behind. However, her dreams were haunted by the mirror's grinning reflection. Each night, she saw the figure coming closer, reaching out through the shards. Months later, Emily began to notice peculiar things happening around her. Objects would shift places in her apartment, and sometimes she felt an unsettling coldness, as if someone or something was watching her. She dismissed these occurrences as stress-induced paranoia, but the fear gnawed at her every day. One evening, while cleaning out an old box in her attic, Emily discovered something she had forgotten: an antique photo album. Among the yellowed pages were old photographs of people from the town where she had lived before. To her shock, one of the photographs was of the house she had spent that fateful night in, with a family standing proudly in front of it. The woman in the photo bore a striking resemblance to her. Emily's heart raced. Could the family have been related to her? She decided to investigate further. She found records of the family in a local archive and discovered that they had vanished mysteriously decades ago, just before the house was abandoned. The investigation revealed that the mirror was an heirloom of the family, rumored to be a gateway to another realm. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily returned to the town. The house, though still dilapidated, had a foreboding air about it. She contacted a local historian who specialized in paranormal phenomena. The historian, intrigued by her story, agreed to help. Together, they set up equipment and spent a night in the house, documenting any strange occurrences. The hours passed in eerie silence until, at midnight, the temperature dropped dramatically. The historian's equipment began to pick up strange readings, and the air grew thick with an unnatural presence. Then, they heard it, a low, guttural whisper echoing through the empty rooms. It grew louder, forming words that sent shivers down their spines. "You have come to us. You belong to us." The historian's eyes widened with recognition. This is no ordinary haunting. It's a form of possession, a link to another realm that wants to cross over. The two were soon enveloped in darkness as the house seemed to distort and bend. Emily could see the mirror's reflection in every surface, but it was different, more vivid, more menacing. The distorted faces of the previous inhabitants appeared, their eyes pleading for help. The historian, conducting a ritual to close the gateway, chanted incantations and made protective symbols on the floor. As the ritual progressed, the house seemed to fight back. Walls trembled, and an oppressive force tried to push them out. At the climax of the ritual, the mirror's frame suddenly appeared in the room, whole and unbroken. The grinning face of the figure was clearer than ever, reaching out through the glass with a desperate, clawing motion. Emily and the historian continued their efforts, but the house seemed to be collapsing under the strain of the struggle. In a final, desperate act, Emily shattered the mirror once more with a ceremonial hammer provided by the historian. The mirror exploded into a million pieces, and a blinding light filled the room. The oppressive force vanished, and the house fell eerily silent. Exhausted but relieved, Emily and the historian emerged from the house just before dawn. The house seemed to have returned to its abandoned state, and the oppressive energy had dissipated. The historian assured Emily that the gateway was closed, but warned her that such places rarely give up their secrets easily. The house was condemned and sealed off, and Emily moved on, carrying the weight of her experience but hopeful that the mirror's curse had been broken. Years later, rumors surfaced about strange occurrences in the town. People claiming to see ghostly reflections in broken mirrors and hearing whispers in the night. Emily knew that the mirror's influence might linger, but for now, she was free, having faced the darkness and survived. Years passed since Emily's harrowing experience with the cursed house. She had moved on, built a new life, and even began to forget the shadows of her past. However, an unsettling sense of familiarity and dread lingered whenever she saw a mirror, even in the most mundane moments. One day, Emily received a cryptic letter with no return address. The letter was typed on an old typewriter, and its contents were chillingly simple. "The mirror is not finished. It waits for you. J." Emily's heart raced. The letter was signed with the initial J, a name that made her shiver. It was from the historian who had helped her, Dr. Jonathan Mercer. She tried to contact him, but all attempts failed. His phone was disconnected, and he had vanished without a trace. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily returned to the town, where the cursed house still stood, eerily untouched by time. The house was now officially condemned and guarded by a high fence, but Emily managed to gain entry through a back gate she discovered on a previous visit. The house, as she remembered, was a shell of its former self. Creaky floorboards, dust-covered surfaces, and an oppressive silence. But as Emily ventured further inside, she noticed something different. The house seemed more intact, almost as if it were trying to repair itself. Her flashlight beam fell upon a strange new addition, a single mirror hanging on a wall where none had been before. It was a simple, unadorned mirror, its glass smooth and unblemished, reflecting the room in unsettling detail. Emily felt a wave of dread but also a strange sense of curiosity. She reached out to touch the mirror, and as her fingers brushed the surface, a shiver ran through her. The room behind her seemed to distort, and the mirror's reflection began to shift, showing fleeting glimpses of a different, nightmarish reality. The reflection seemed alive, its surface pulsing and rippling like a living entity. Emily heard a whisper, a low, guttural voice saying, "Welcome back." She turned to see the dark figure she had encountered years ago now emerging from the mirror. It was more defined, more powerful, and its eyes gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. The figure spoke, its voice echoing with centuries of malevolence. "You broke the mirror, but the essence remains. I needed a vessel to return." Panic surged through Emily, but she remembered Dr. Mercer's warnings. She had to act quickly. Scanning the room, she noticed that the house was indeed changing. Walls shifting, rooms elongating. The mirror was not merely a reflection but a conduit to an ever-expanding realm. Desperate, Emily searched for anything that could help her. She found a dusty, leather-bound book lying atop a pile of old newspapers. Opening it, she saw that it contained notes and rituals, written in Dr. Mercer's handwriting. The book detailed a way to sever the connection between the mirror and its otherworldly source. She followed the instructions, chanting the incantations as best as she could remember. As she did, the figure in the mirror grew more agitated, its form writhing and distorting. The house itself seemed to resist, the very walls trembling and shifting in protest. Suddenly, the mirror began to glow with an intense, blinding light. The air was filled with a deafening roar as the otherworldly presence fought to remain. Emily pressed on, determined to finish the ritual. The light from the mirror grew brighter, and with one final, forceful chant, she completed the incantation. The house shook violently, and then, with a thunderous crash, the mirror shattered. The dark figure let out a final, anguished scream before being sucked back into the shards. The house fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The mirror's fragments lay scattered, their power seemingly drained. Exhausted, Emily left the house as dawn broke. She knew that the mirror's curse had been powerful and that the struggle was not over. She discovered later that Dr. Mercer had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, his research and notes left behind. Though the mirror was gone, its curse had left a mark. Emily decided to dedicate her life to studying the paranormal, helping others who might encounter similar horrors. She hoped that by understanding the dark forces at play, she could prevent them from ever returning. Years later, as she lectured on her findings in a university, a student approached her with a worn-out, familiar-looking book, a book she had seen before in Dr. Mercer's notes. The student claimed it had been found in an old estate sale, and as Emily leafed through the pages, she noticed a new, handwritten note at the end. "The mirror is not finished. It will call again." A shiver ran down Emily's spine. The battle might have been won, but the war against the shadows was far from over. The mirror's curse had been merely a chapter in an ongoing saga, and the darkness would return. Emily's unease grew with the discovery of the new note in Dr. Mercer's book. The mention of the mirror's unfinished business was both chilling and intriguing. Determined to uncover more, Emily delved into her research, tracking down any leads related to the mirror, the house, and Dr. Mercer's disappearance. Months of investigation revealed that Dr. Mercer had been working on an extensive study of artifacts and relics connected to otherworldly forces. Among his belongings, Emily discovered a hidden journal containing detailed entries about his attempts to understand and contain various supernatural entities. The journal hinted at a series of mirrors, not just one, each linked to a different realm or entity. One entry caught Emily's eye. It described a ritual to close a portal but mentioned that destroying one mirror might only be part of a larger puzzle. Dr. Mercer had theorized that these mirrors were interconnected, each one potentially feeding off the others, forming a network of dark energy. Emily realized that if one mirror was still active, it could mean that others were, too. She decided to investigate the origins of the mirrors and their connection to the dark force she had encountered. Her research led her to an old, remote estate, once owned by a wealthy collector of rare and occult items. The estate, abandoned and rumored to be cursed, was said to house a hidden collection of mirrors and artifacts. Emily approached the estate with a mixture of trepidation and determination. The mansion was as decrepit as expected, its grandeur lost to years of neglect. Inside, she found evidence of a former collector's obsession. Mirrors of all shapes and sizes, many covered in dust and cobwebs. Among them was a series of ornate mirrors, each with intricate designs similar to the one she had encountered. As she explored, Emily felt a familiar sensation of being watched. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She found a hidden room behind a bookcase, its walls lined with more mirrors and strange symbols. At the center was an altar with a large, unbroken mirror, its surface shimmering with an unnatural light. As Emily approached the altar, she noticed a diary lying open beside the mirror. The diary belonged to the collector, detailing his obsession with the mirrors and their dark origins. It revealed that the mirrors were part of a larger ritual designed to channel and amplify otherworldly energies. The collector had sought to harness this power, but it had ultimately consumed him. Emily's heart raced as she read the final entries. The collector had attempted a dangerous ritual to merge the mirror's energies, hoping to gain ultimate power. His notes suggested that this ritual, if completed, would open a permanent gateway to the other realm, allowing the dark entities to cross over indefinitely. Determined to stop any further damage, Emily took action. She knew she had to prevent the completion of the ritual. She gathered the necessary tools from the diary, salt, herbs, and candles, preparing for a protective ritual to counteract the dark forces. As she performed the ritual, the air grew heavy with tension. The mirrors began to glow, their reflections twisting and warping. Shadows danced on the walls, and an oppressive force pressed in from all sides. Emily chanted the incantations, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. The mirror at the center of the altar began to pulse with a dark energy, and the shadows seemed to grow more tangible. Emily felt a cold, clammy presence wrapping around her. She pushed through the fear, focusing on her chants and symbols. The mirror's reflections grew chaotic, and the dark force seemed to struggle against her efforts. With one final, intense chant, Emily completed the ritual. The mirrors shattered, their glass fragments falling like rain. A blinding light filled the room, and the oppressive force dissipated. The hidden room fell silent, the air now clear of the dark energy that had plagued it. Exhausted but relieved, Emily left the estate as dawn approached. She knew that the mirrors were destroyed, but the sense of unfinished business lingered. She had managed to close one gateway, but the connection between realms was still a threat. The dark forces were persistent and elusive. In the months that followed, Emily continued her work, focusing on studying and preventing supernatural threats. She joined forces with other experts and established a network to deal with paranormal disturbances. Her experience had made her a leading figure in the field, but she remained vigilant, aware that the dark forces were always waiting for another opportunity. One evening, while organizing her notes, Emily received another letter, this time from an anonymous sender. The letter contained a simple message: "The darkness never rests. Be prepared. G." Emily's resolve hardened. She had faced the darkness before and would do so again. The battle against the shadows was far from over, and she was ready to confront whatever came next. Despite her vigilance, Emily's life was upended when reports of strange occurrences began surfacing globally. The darkness seemed to seep through cracks she thought were sealed. Her network of experts and researchers worked tirelessly, but the supernatural disturbances grew more frequent and intense. One evening, Emily received an urgent call. A powerful artifact had surfaced, a mirror unlike any other, rumored to be the source of the dark forces she had battled. The mirror had been discovered in an ancient, hidden chamber beneath a forgotten library, its surface eerily intact and shimmering with an ominous glow. Determined to end the threat once and for all, Emily gathered her team and traveled to the library. They found the mirror surrounded by arcane symbols and a dark, swirling mist. As they prepared the ritual to destroy it, the mirror's surface reflected a nightmarish realm, revealing an endless void of shadow. The ritual was intense and dangerous, the dark forces pushing back with all their might. Emily and her team chanted ancient incantations, their voices blending with the mirror's malevolent whispers. With a final, decisive spell, the mirror shattered, and the dark energy was sucked back into the void. The room fell silent. The oppressive aura lifted, and the mirror's shards were scattered across the floor. Their dark power dissipated. Exhausted but victorious, Emily and her team left the library, knowing they had finally closed the last gateway. Emily returned to her work, now focusing on educating others about the dangers of dark artifacts and supernatural entities. The mirror's destruction brought a semblance of peace, but Emily remained vigilant, aware that the shadows were ever watchful. In her final reflection, Emily understood that while she had faced the darkness, the light of knowledge and preparedness was the key to keeping it at bay. Her journey had been fraught with peril, but her resolve to protect others remained unshaken. The darkness had been thwarted, but Emily knew that vigilance was eternal. The battle was won, but the war against the shadows would continue in the annals of history, with her as a stalwart guardian.